I've prepared historical photos that give you goosebumps. Subscribe. I try to bring something really unusual every day. Union Pacific steam locomotive number 3531 lies jackknifed at Camila, Oregon after a rear-end freight collision, steam spilling across the tracks. This 2880 design had two engine sets for mountain-pulling Poway. A wrecked twin-engine Potez 6311 lies burning near Louvain on the 14th of May as helmeted troops move past the crash site. Built mainly for fast photo scouting, this model proved too slow and lightly protected in the 1940 campaign. Carol Cole, age 47, sits in a Nevada State Prison interview in 1985, holding a cigarette and watching someone off camera with a cold, tired focus. Recorded 3 days before the state carried out his sentence. The Fisk metal burial case stands upright like a sealed iron shell, a Victorian invention sold to families who wanted to slow decay and block air and water. Patented in 1848, these cases were so tight that some later finds still showed clothing. A man named Michael Siegel is marched through Munich on March 10, 1933, with a sign around his neck that says he will never complain to the police again. It was an early public warning under the new Nazi government, but he later escaped to Lima. Valery Bespalov and Alexei Ananenko are shown from the Chernobyl cleanup, linked to the high-risk valve mission to drain water under intense radiation in 1986. The "it would have covered all Europe" claim is a myth. A Victorian couple rides an 1890 tandem penny farthing with huge front wheels made to smooth rough roads before air-filled tires became common. These tall bicycles were fast but risky to stop, so riders practiced a running dismount. A trained Indian elephant from the Hamburg Zoo hauls heavy timber in Valenciennes, France in 1915, watched by German soldiers and local workers. With horses and trucks stretched thin, armies sometimes used circus and zoo animals for brute force jobs. A Japanese Mitsubishi G4M Betty flies over Port Moresby as it drops its load during a World War II attack run. Built for very long range, it traded protection for distance, which made it dangerously fragile when defenders hit it. A blonde entertainer poses with soldiers in front of a shark-mouth fighter jet, a strange mix of glamour and flightline grit. The caption says Operation Desert Storm in 1991, but that date should be treated as unverified without the original source. Pilot trainees sit in a Camina, Belgian Congo classroom in the 1950s, facing a chalkboard lesson on aircraft systems. The wall rack of flight helmets hints at how colonial air schools trained crews fast, often with strict routines and little room for mistakes. German prisoners after Stalingrad in 1943 stand packed together in deep winter gear, with one man's face almost hidden by ice and cloth. The battle ended with over 90,000 Germans captured, and only a small fraction would ever return home. Vaudeville strongwoman Joan Rhodes hoists 7'2" boxer Ewart Potgieter in a playful backstage pose from the 1950s. Stage strength acts used real wrestling and lifting technique. An F-6, F-3, Hellcat of VF-15 is launched from USS Hornet CV-12 on a hangar deck catapult on February 25, 1944, skimming past the ship's side in a split second. The Hellcat was built to be tough and easy to fly at sea. Gladys Ingle of the 13 Black Cats balances on the wing of the Heffling Special as another plane flies inches away for a mid-air transfer. This group made silent film era crowds gasp with wing walking and even in flight archery. Marines lie low on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, with Mount Suribachi looming through smoke in the distance. The island was only about 8 square miles, yet the fight lasted 36 days because the defenders built deep tunnels and hidden positions. Wrecked Messerschmitt. Me-262 jet fighters sit in a hidden forest dispersal area near Obertraubling in 1945. Germany scattered jets into woods and makeshift plants to dodge air raids, but fuel shortages and constant attacks left many grounded. Randy Gardner is shown before and during his famous 1964 sleep deprivation test when he stayed awake for 11 days. By the end, he had slurred speech, poor memory, and shaky focus. A German assault team near Verdun in 1916 poses with a backpack fuel unit and a hose nozzle meant to project burning liquid into trenches. This terrifying tool was built for short-range shock attacks, but it made its operators obvious targets the moment it was used. Arnold Schwarzenegger hits a wide victory pose on the Mr. Olympia stage in 1974, with the crowd blurred behind him. He won that year after a one-year break from the title, setting up the legendary 1975 comeback that was filmed for Pumping Iron. The Apollo 13 command module is lifted from the ocean, with inflatable flotation balloons still attached, its heat shield scarred from re-entry. After an onboard oxygen tank failure, the crew used the lunar module as a lifeboat. Winston Churchill is carried on a stretcher in New York in 1931 after being hit by a car, still gripping a cigar and looking oddly calm. He had stepped into traffic the wrong way out of habit from Britain, and he recovered and went on to lead Britain in World War II. Police line up to test gas masks by stepping into a mobile gas chamber truck in 1939, with an officer pulling back the curtain like a stage act. These drills used irritant gas to reveal bad seals fast, because one tiny leak could make a mask useless. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay stand on Everest on May 29, 1953, wearing glacier goggles and holding rope like proof they really made it. They reached the top using bottled oxygen. A downed United States P-51 Mustang sits half-sunk in a Swiss river in 1944 after it crossed into neutral airspace and was brought down. Switzerland guarded its borders hard, and both Allied and Axis aircraft were forced to land or were intercepted. The unfinished Soviet carrier Riga is launched in 1988, a giant hull that would later be renamed Varyag and left in Ukraine after the Soviet collapse. Sold in 1998 and rebuilt in Dalian, it entered Chinese service as the aircraft carrier Liaoning. Miss France poses on a beach in 1920 wearing a one-piece swimsuit and a sash, capturing the new post-war freedom of the Jazz Age. Early pageants sold modern style as national pride. Canadian soldiers crawl onto the frozen Imjin River to start a friendly hockey game during the Korean War in 1951, with tents and troops watching from the bank. In brutal winters, pickup sports like this were a quick morale reset. A glamorous French stage star, often identified as Cécile Sorel, poses with jeweled headpiece and pearls in the high drama style of early 20th century portrait studios. She helped popularize the modern diva image, where fashion, attitude. Marcela Gracia Ibeas and Elisa Sanchez Loriga made history in Spain in 1901 by marrying in A Coruña after Elisa presented herself as a man named Mario Sanchez. The wedding was registered, but the story exploded in the press and forced them to flee. A World War II coastal patrol boat slips through a canal by Caledonia Works, with crews scanning the waterline from a tiny open deck. Many of these boats were crewed by local volunteers and older men. USS Franklin limps through the sea in 1945, its flight deck scorched and crowded as smoke rises from deep inside the ship. Despite massive damage, the crew kept it afloat and brought it home. The first Table Mountain cable car in Cape Town, opened on October 4, 1929, looks like a wooden box hanging over a huge drop. More than 20 million riders have used the route since then. Mary Quant poses with her models in sharp 1960s mini looks, the style that helped turn London street fashion into global news. Her early mini designs appeared around 1962, and the short hem became a symbol of youth culture. Bodybuilding stars pose on a beach in 1970, with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the far right and Frank Zane at the far left, beside Dave Draper and Betty Brosmer. These photos helped turn bodybuilding from a niche gym scene into a mass market look. A Victorian-era advertisement sells a tiny cyclist's friend pocket gun for 12 shillings, pitched as something no lady or gentleman rider should be without. It even offered rail delivery, packed complete with extra rounds. Hungarian yoga teacher Laszlo Szabo holds a deep balance pose for Budapest television on March 9, 1963. In a region where yoga was still rare on mainstream media, this broadcast made an exotic practice look surprisingly practical and athletic. A child tests Robert the Robot, a remote-controlled toy shown at the American National Exhibition in Moscow in 1959, with huge spiral goggles that look like science fiction. These demo robots were Cold War showpieces. President Lyndon B. Johnson watches 3 television sets as election numbers roll in on November 3, 1964. The split screens show how politics became a live data spectacle, with results changing in real time from one box to the next. Phyllis Cotter checks her lipstick with a tiny mirror while a belt of .50 caliber rounds hangs over her shoulders at a Douglas aircraft plant in Santa Monica in 1943. Behind her sits a half-built A-20 Havoc. Howard Carter carefully works on the second of Tutankhamun's 3 nested coffins in 1925, leaning in with a small tool like a watchmaker. The burial set was built like a locked puzzle, with layers meant to protect the king for eternity. A German soldier in 1941 grins while holding a large bust of Joseph Stalin, turning a propaganda icon into a trophy. The eerie part is how quickly symbols change hands in war, while the real cost stays off camera. Victorian beachgoers sit by numbered bathing machines, wheeled cabins that were rolled into the surf so people could change and enter the water out of view. Many beaches even enforced separate hours for men and women, so a simple swim came with strict rules and rolling privacy rooms. Men stand around the crushed East Conemaugh Borough fire engine after the Johnstown flood of 1889, a machine broken like a toy by the surge. When the South Fork Dam failed, a wall of water tore through the valley and killed over 2,000 people in minutes. A bird's-eye view shows Leechburg, Pennsylvania, swallowed by the Kiski River flood on March 18, 1936, with rooftops and streets turned into one flat sheet of water. That month's floods hit much of the Northeast after heavy rain and melting snow. A torn Heinkel He-111 bomber fuselage is hauled by truck to a scrapyard in October 1940, its skin peeled back like a giant tin can. After the Battle of Britain, crashed aircraft were stripped fast for scarce aluminum. John F. Kennedy chats with his sister Eunice in her Washington home in the late 1940s, caught in a casual kitchen moment beside an open refrigerator. He lived with her for about 3 years while serving in Congress. Nurses in training at Beth Israel Hospital in Brooklyn sit in neat rows in the early 1940s, heads down over their notes in starched uniforms. During World War II, schools like this had to train faster to fill hospital wards. An electric mine haulage train sits in Vintondale, Pennsylvania, in 1896, a small locomotive built to pull heavy coal cars on narrow tracks, switching from mules to electric power cut smoke and heat underground. First Officer Maureen Dunlop smiles beside an aircraft on September 16, 1944, flight gear in hand after ferrying a new plane for the Air Transport Auxiliary. A TA pilots delivered thousands of aircraft from factories to airfields. Women munitions workers in Kirkby, Merseyside, pose with a freshly made bomb casing in the 1940s, smiling like it is a trophy. Wartime factories hired huge numbers of women, and the job was risky because explosive dust. Jane Mansfield rides on Mickey Hargitay's shoulders at a party in 1956, both in matching leopard print as cameras and guests crowd in. Their look was pure mid-century publicity. German commander Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben is shown in June 1944, muddy and exhausted after being taken in Cherbourg as Allied forces closed in. Cherbourg fell days later, giving the Allies a major deep water port to supply the Normandy campaign. A Heinkel He-111 nose gunner sits in a glass bubble over the channel in the summer of 1940 with a perfect forward view and almost no protection. The bomber had been fast in the 1930s, but in the Battle of Britain, it faced faster Hurricanes and Spitfires. B&O freight cars lie piled like dominoes in a train wreck on Broadway in Myersdale, Pennsylvania, in the early 1960s, blocking the line through town. The scary part is how one broken coupling or missed signal can turn tons of moving steel into a street-level avalanche in seconds. Albert Einstein stands beside his wife Elsa on the ship bound for Japan in October 1922. A lifebuoy marked Kitano Maru Tokyo at her feet. When they arrived, crowds packed outside their hotel to see him. A farmer in Fowler, Indiana pours water into an automatic hog waterer in 1937, hauling 80 gallons about 50 yards to keep it filled. Automatic still meant pure muscle, and this kind of daily hauling could add up to tons of water moved by hand each week. The Christie 20-liter V4 racer from 1907 shows its huge exposed engine and chain drive, built when speed meant brute size over comfort. Cars like this had almost no protection or brakes by modern standards. The Reichstag walls are covered in handwritten Soviet soldier messages after the Battle of Berlin in 1945, turning a symbol of power into a public notebook. Many inscriptions include names, hometowns, and dates. An African-American couple sits in a one-room cabin around 1900 with newspapers pasted over the walls to block drafts and keep heat in. The headlines and ads become both insulation and wallpaper. Jazbo the Clown leans on a Times Square subway column in 1958 after missing the Rockaway Express, still in full costume and makeup. Stetson factory workers steam and shape felt into wide-brim cowboy hats on an assembly line. The iconic Boss of the Plains look was mass-produced by the millions, turning frontier style into industrial output. Workers on Iwo Jima cut apart a wrecked ship half buried in volcanic sand on February 21, 1954. The island kept swallowing the metal, so crews had to dig and slice it out like a fossil. The camera looked straight down the Maple Hill mine shaft in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania, in 1938, with the cage rails vanishing into a black square. One slip here meant a drop into the coal world far below, a daily ride miners took before sunrise. A Daisy May nose art bomber sits on the ramp while crew climb over the engines, showing how crews personalized identical aircraft with pin-up names and paint. The twist is that Daisy May was reused by multiple air forces. The Statue of Liberty rises in Paris in 1884, half hidden in scaffolding like a giant secret being built in a city street. Before sailing to New York, she was assembled in sections to test the fit, then taken apart again for the ocean trip. A Scottish policeman questions two children caught with stolen garden vegetables in 1911, the produce piled at their feet. The photo feels almost staged, but it shows how even small thefts were treated as a public lesson in hard times. Winter Olympics athletes gather around an early sled at the 1924 Games, with spectators crowding in close because there were no barriers. These Chamonix events became the first official Winter Olympics. Two Persian Jewish women pose in the 1880s, faces veiled and clothing heavy with silver jewelry and layered fabric. Studio photos like this preserved everyday identity and status through textiles and ornaments. Displaced Germans crowd a ruined Berlin station after World War II, sleeping on platforms beneath shattered arches. As borders shifted, millions of ethnic Germans were expelled westward, creating one of the largest forced migrations in modern Europe. A fleet air arm, Grumman Avenger, sits half-submerged beside the escort carrier HMS Smiter after an engine failure right after takeoff, with crew clinging to the fuselage. Warplanes could stay afloat for minutes to hours depending on damage and sea state. A sailor aboard HMS Emperor writes, "An installment from London on a Grumman Hellcat of 800 Squadron just off southern France before the invasion. It is a quiet ritual of air war, turning metal under a wing into a personal note right before the sortie." A Marine parachutist sits in a field shelter cleaning a Johnson rifle during the Guadalcanal campaign, surrounded by boots and gear. He was later killed on the first day of Iwo Jima with the 5th Marine Division. A young Mexican-American girl in Robstown, Texas, in 1939, presses tortillas and cooks them on a wood stove in a one-room kitchen. The flatbread was made daily because store-bought bread was costly. Nursing class of 1927 poses at Mercy Hospital in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, in the signature white caps and uniforms of early nursing schools. They trained before modern antibiotics. In 1940, a Citroën worker checks the oil on a truck built in France under military control. A famous story says the company printed a lower oil mark on the dipstick so engines would run short under heavy load. Chief Irontail poses with an early automobile in 1915, showing how fast cars were reaching native leaders and public events in the early motor age. He became one of the most photographed Native American figures of his time. A mid-19th century shoemaker hammers a leather sole while his cat sits at his feet, turning a workshop portrait into a quiet snapshot of daily labor. Early shoe shops relied on hand tools and foot-powered machines. Margot Frank stands beside Anne Frank in a rare outdoor photo, a calm moment before the war erased their private lives. Margot also kept a diary, but it was never found. So much of what we know about her comes through Anne's sharp. Franklin Delano Roosevelt teases his cousin on a boat in 1910, years before he became the 32nd President of the United States. That playful confidence later powered him through polio and into leading the nation through the Great Depression. Helena Plotnicka, born in 1902, is shown in a stark portrait taken before she died on the 17th of March, 1944, while imprisoned during the Second World War. Sources say she secretly brought food and messages to trapped people near the camp zone. Engineer Casey Jones poses in the cab of Illinois Central Locomotive number 382, days before the crash near Vaughan, Mississippi, on April 30th, 1900. He stayed at the controls and slowed the train enough that passengers survived. Jacob Whiteeyes and Iron Tail sit at Café Greco in Rome in the 1890s, bringing Plains regalia into one of Europe's most famous artist cafes. The scene feels like a quiet power move. In 1966, the casket used to carry President John F. Kennedy from Dallas to Washington was removed from storage and sent out over deep Atlantic water off the mid-Atlantic coast. It was heavily weighted and released to sink permanently. Migrant women sit in a waiting area at Locust Point after arriving on the North German Lloyd steamship SS Neckar on the 14th of June, 1904. Their bundles show how travel was one suitcase life. An Italian airman rests on the wing of his Machi MC 202 Folgore in 1942, using the warm metal as a bed between missions under a huge desert sky. The Folgore was prized for its smooth handling and high speed. A United States Marine moves through the streets of Hue, Vietnam, on the 6th of February, 1968, with a stray dog crossing a shattered road beside damaged buildings. The Tet period turned Hue into a weeks-long city fight that shocked audiences worldwide. An 82nd Airborne paratrooper is rushed to a medical evacuation helicopter near Al Salman, Iraq, in February 1991 during Desert Storm. Fast helicopter rescue cut the time from injury to surgery from hours to minutes. The Japanese light cruiser Agano cuts through the sea off Sasebo, its long hull built for speed and escort duty in the Second World War. Launched in 1941, it was sunk in 1944 after repeated submarine attacks. 5 Byron Company photographers crowd together on a New York City rooftop in December 1920 to make what is often called the first group selfie. They held a heavy large format camera at arm's length. Hungarian troops train prone with a water-cooled Schwarzlos machine gun, a heavy weapon built for long bursts without overheating. Its belt feed and bulky cooling jacket made it reliable but slow to move, so crews had to plan their position like a trap. 16-year-old Brian May plays the homemade Red Special in 1963. The guitar he built with his father Harold from a century-old fireplace mantel. Its unusual wiring and pickup setup helped create Queen's instantly recognizable tone. Soviet photojournalist Semyon Osipovich Fridliand rides horseback in the Kuban region in May 1943, wrapped in a heavy cloak against the spring wind. A young Billy Connolly smiles in uniform during his Territorial Army Reserve time with the 15th Scottish Battalion of the Parachute Regiment in the early 1970s. Before fame, he worked tough jobs and played folk music. American soldiers walked toward a battered chapel in Normandy on June 11, 1944, just days after D-Day. So close to the invasion beaches, the ruined stone walls became a temporary place to breathe, pray. Marilyn Monroe poses in a farm girl look in December 1945, years before she became a global movie icon. The same shoot was later reused and published in a Dutch magazine in June 1949. English rancher John Tunstall is pictured shortly before his killing in Lincoln County, New Mexico in February 1878, a spark that set off the Lincoln County War. Suzanne Lenglen lunges for a shot in February 1926, the French star whose speed and style changed women's tennis. Her clash with Helen Wills became a global headline, a rare moment when two icons proved the sport could be ruthless. Young apprentices train in wheelwright work at Hampton Institute in Hampton, Virginia, around 1899 to 1900, shaping wood and iron into wagon wheels in a factory-like classroom. This kind of industrial education was designed to feed skilled jobs. Mary and Margaret Gibb dance mid-step, turning a studio photo into a burst of joy and perfect timing. They later toured in vaudeville and sideshows, then went home to Massachusetts and ran a small gift shop for 7 years. Charles stands in his station master uniform in 1914, the calm gatekeeper of a railway that ran by the clock. Men like him controlled signals and departures, and a single waved flag could clear a path for famous expresses like the Flying Scotsman. An elderly woman stands by her clawfoot tub in an East Village apartment around the 1960s, when the neighborhood was still working class and rough around the edges. Her rent was about $24 a month. A professor teaches chemistry on NBC's Continental Classroom between 1958 and 1963, holding a large molecular model beside a chalkboard of formulas. The show aired on weekday mornings, and many colleges even gave course credit. A Fowler, Indiana farmer, relaxes at 7:40 in the evening in 1937, playing with his youngest child while the other kids linger nearby. With 9 children, Julia Miller stands in front of shelves packed with home-canned food near White Plains in Greene County, Georgia, in 1941. The roughly 1,000 jars of fruit and vegetables were a winter survival plan, sealed by heat and time when store supply and cash could fail. Oil tycoon Howard Marshall II marries model Anna Nicole Smith in 1994, a tabloid flash captured in one stark frame. After his death, the inheritance fight became a famous court saga that reached the Supreme Court of the United States. Imam Enver Yildirim leads a prayer service with Finnish Tatars at the Jarvenpää Mosque in 1989. The Tatar community in Finland is small, but has kept its language and faith alive for over a century through tight family networks and local congregations. French writer and critic Marc de Montefiore poses in a studio cabinet card from the 1870s, dressed in a sharp-tailored suit with an unapologetic stance. Rescuers dig through deep snow after the February 17, 1926, avalanche in the Bingham area canyons of Utah, where slides cut off water flow and crushed work sites. Reports feared more than 18 deaths in nearby gulches. Robert Frank's New Orleans trolley photo from 1955 frames riders through bus windows, turning a normal commute into a quiet study of who is seen and who is separated. Pierre Cardin studies an Ottoman caftan linked to Sultan Murad III in 1972, staring at centuries-old silk and gold like it is a blueprint. These robes were power symbols, and their patterns and embroidery still inspire modern runway shapes and motifs. An RAF dental officer treats a patient in a mobile surgery in the Western Desert during the Second World War, using a foot treadle drill while an orderly assists. With power and supplies limited, this pedal-driven setup kept aircrew fit to fly from remote landing grounds. Walt Disney stands beside a Red Cross ambulance in France in 1919, when he served as a young driver after the First World War. He was only a teenager then, and those long road days came before he built the animation empire that would carry his name worldwide. While we're watching these shots, write in the comments, which one turned out to be the strongest, and why exactly did it catch? A wedding group photo in 1927 is hilariously interrupted by a pig strolling across the foreground like it owns the moment. It is a perfect reminder that many ceremonies were held on farms. Manfred von Richthofen pets his dog on an airfield in 1916, a quiet pause beside the open sky. Within 2 years, he would become the Red Baron, credited with 80 aerial victories and turned into a legend while still in his 20s. Lucille Ball crouches in full football padding on the set of The Three Stooges in 1934, long before she became television's biggest comedy star. She spent years as a hard-working studio contract player. A penny oyster stand on South Street in 1885 sells cheap oysters to dockworkers and sailors along New York's busy waterfront. Oysters were once so plentiful that they were working-class street food, and their shells were even used to pave roads. The first White Castle in Wichita, Kansas opens in 1921, selling 5-cent hamburgers from a tiny castle-shaped stand. The chain used spotless white buildings to signal clean food at a time when many people feared unsafe meat. A couple stands with their 9 daughters in the early 1940s, lined up like a living family timeline from toddler to young adult. With no sons, every chore and expectation in the household landed on this all-girl team. A damaged Tiger tank sits near the Brandenburg Gate in late April 1945 as Berlin collapses into chaos in the last days of the Second World War. This vehicle was a patchwork Frankentank built from mixed parts. 3 Moriori women stand outside a Maori-style meeting house on the Chatham Islands, Rekohu, photographed in the 1890s. This rare image freezes a people who survived invasion and forced assimilation. A crowd opens the seldom-seen Valley Mine near Patton, Pennsylvania in the late 1950s, a coal operation rebranded as a tourist mine. After peaking in 1951, production collapsed and ended in 1963, leaving tours as the future. Pioneers clear a Soviet minefield on the Eastern Front in December 1943, working in open ground as dirt erupts nearby. This job was among the deadliest because one mistake could set off a chain of hidden charges and stop an entire advance. A Marion, Ohio dairy farm in the 1940s shows a bold barn sign reading, "Girl milk produced here," beside a worker and a cow. The slogan was a marketing stunt meant to reassure buyers about pure milk. A young German soldier walks with a white flag to surrender to American troops near St. Lo in Normandy in mid-July 1944. The battle for St. Lo was key because it opened the road for the Allied breakout from the beachhead into France. Snow buries the Civilian Conservation Corps barracks at the Sligo camp in Clarion County, Pennsylvania during the 1930s Great Depression. The CCC put millions of young men to work building parks, trails, and fire breaks. Anne Frank became famous because her diary from hiding was published after the war and let people see history through a real teenager's eyes. Its honest voice made the suffering feel personal, so her story became a symbol for millions. 2 captured Luftwaffe airmen are escorted through London in 1940 during the Battle of Britain. After their Heinkel, He-111 was brought down. The calm, almost casual walk shows a strange wartime routine. Even in a city under air raids, Carl Emil Pettersson, a Swedish sailor, ended up on Tabor Island after a shipwreck in 1904, and later became a local leader through marriage into the ruling family. Valley View school children in Three Forks pose beside their 1917 school bus an enclosed wagon pulled by horses with driver Eric Anderson. Consolidated routes like this replaced tiny one-room schools by hauling kids longer distances every day. Sparks circus clowns pose as a full troupe in 1925, their makeup and costumes built to read from the back row of a big top. Many performers lived on the road year-round, and a single photo like this was used as advertising, proof of the show's big cast. A timber crew in southern West Virginia in 1903 uses teams of horses or mules to drag massive logs out of the hills. Before trucks and chainsaws, hauling depended on animal power and skill, and one wrong move could wreck the load or the team. Alcatraz's road tower stands over the island in 1934, built to watch the main approach when the prison opened as a federal penitentiary. The high catwalk and clear sight lines show why escapes were so rare. Every move was visible against open water. A 1986 newspaper photo shows math teachers protesting calculator use in grade school, warning it would weaken basic number sense. The fight sounds old, but it repeats every time a new tool appears. Surrendered German soldiers march past the shattered Brandenburg Gate in Berlin in 1945, with rubble and wrecked barrels piled in the foreground. The photo captures the city's final collapse in one frame. Imperial Monument behind them, ruined street beneath them. Veronica Lucan is photographed in London on November 15, 1974, days after her husband Lord Lucan vanished and was never reliably seen again. The case became a lasting mystery because the key suspect disappeared. The wreckage of the German cruiser SMS Magdeburg was stuck in the ice of the Baltic Sea in the winter from the 14th to the 15th year. From this crash site, the Russian military retrieved German naval cipher books, which were handed over to Britain and helped the Allies read naval messages. The German light cruiser Leipzig fires her guns from Gdynia Harbor in March 1945 as Soviet forces close in. Crippled after a collision in October 1944, she later escaped at only 6 knots while evacuating refugees to Denmark. A skier launches off a jump during a July 1, 1989 summer ski promotion at Seven Springs Resort near Champion, Pennsylvania. Resorts used shaved ice or man-made snow to stage these stunts. Men stand in the ruins at LaSalle Street in Washington after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, with whole blocks reduced to broken brick. The fire left about 100,000 people homeless and forced Chicago to rebuild with stricter fireproof materials. Young women toast at the bar on the luxury liner SS Manhattan off New York on December 5, 1933. Before Prohibition ended, ship bars had to wait until about 12 miles offshore to serve. Eugen Sandow poses in 1902, showing the physique that made him the first global bodybuilding superstar. He sold mail-order exercise plans and staged muscle display shows, basically inventing modern fitness marketing. Mrs. D.W. Steele of Wood County, West Virginia, shows shelves of home-canned food in 1943, a private pantry built jar by jar. Even without strict rationing, families were pushed to grow and preserve just in case. Cretan villagers faced German paratroopers at Contomari in 1941, a tense standoff where fear and defiance are both visible. This image became one of the clearest photo records of wartime reprisals on Crete, showing how fast occupation could turn ordinary people into targets. A scene from the syndicated United States television series Police Station in 1959 shows a suspect questioned across a desk under harsh lights. The show sold itself as stories pulled from real case files. Jane Mansfield poses at the South Shore Open Air Baths in Blackpool in 1959 as her husband Mickey Hargitay slips off her white coat for the cameras. These staged poolside photo calls were pure publicity, designed to feed newspaper spreads. An East German border policeman watches through binoculars on a bridge between East and West Berlin in 1961 as the city was cut in two. That year, the Berlin Wall went up, turning everyday streets into guarded front lines overnight. Three people sit on the ground in front of a teepee at Sitting Bull's camp in South Dakota in 1890, caught in a quiet, ordinary moment. It was the final year of his life, and the tension around his followers was rising fast as the government moved to control Lakota communities. Italian journalist and anti-fascist thinker Piero Gobetti died in Paris on February 15, 1926, only 24 years old. Friends linked his collapse to injuries from a fascist beating the year before. American soldiers wade toward Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, captured by Robert F. Sargent in the famous Into the Jaws of Death photograph. It became iconic because it shows the landing as raw reality, a few seconds where fear, weight, and surf decide who reaches the sand. Obeish, the first hippopotamus in Victorian Britain, rests in his London Zoo pool after arriving in 1850 from the White Nile. He became an overnight celebrity that doubled visitor numbers and proved zoos could sell star animals like a live headline. A small sailboat named Annie crosses Yellowstone Lake in 1871, one of the first documented boat trips there. This mattered because it marked the start of recorded exploration on the lake, before the park became a major tourist destination. Members of the Russian All-Military Union stand at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Paris on August 2, 1931, with flags raised in salute. It was an émigré army in exile, using this ritual to keep loyalty and identity alive far from Russia. Soldiers pose wearing Zelensky Kumant gas masks in 1916, their metal filter cans and fabric hoods built for the poison gas battlefields of the First World War. This Russian design used activated charcoal filtration. Muhammad Ali strains to lift Johnny Coulon, a tiny retired fighter nicknamed the Unliftable Man, using leverage and balance to make himself feel impossibly heavy. The trick is simple physics. Drop your center of gravity and lock your hips so even a stronger person cannot get you off the ground. Hungarian troops train on the Eastern Front, crawling under barbed wire with rifles in a field that looks like real combat ground. Drills like this were meant to harden soldiers for artillery and machine gun fire, where staying low was often the only defense. A driver sits in an early Hudson automobile as new cars line up outside the factory, the moment Hudson Motor Car Company was incorporated on February 20, 1909. Hudson later became famous for fast, durable cars that won long-distance races. The Kawasaki Ka-87, a twin-engine heavy night bomber built in Japan under Dornier license, makes its first flight on February 19, 1926. A wiring party from the 12th Battalion, East Yorkshire Regiment, moves through a muddy communication trench near Rockland Court in January 1918. They laid and repaired field telephone lines because one cut wire could leave a whole sector blind and unable to call for help. Kaiser Wilhelm II is received at Vienna's Northern Railway Station by Emperor Karl in a formal wartime greeting. The scene captures the German and Austro-Hungarian alliance in public display. Lee E. Mosley is shown in a jail-style portrait linked to his conviction in the death of Seattle police officer Amos J. Comer. On February 19, 1926, he died in state custody at the Walla Walla State Penitentiary. Norman Rockwell's Freedom of Speech appears in the Saturday Evening Post on February 20, 1943, showing an ordinary man standing up in a town meeting. The Four Freedoms paintings became wartime icons. A young Sophia Loren sits backstage at Miss Italia in 1950, wearing the Miss Lazio badge while judges hover nearby. She did not win the crown, but the pageant circuit opened doors that soon took her from Naples poverty to international film fame. Two Royal Army Medical Corps officers picked through a bomb-damaged pharmacy in Regalbuto, Sicily, on August 3, 1943, hunting for iodine and basic drugs. It shows battlefield medicine as scavenging. Wounded British prisoners of war are treated on stretchers in an Italian field hospital in North Africa in the spring of 1942. Even behind the lines, shortages and heat made care a race against time with only basic supplies. Mickey Rooney goofs around with his wife Martha Vickers on a diving board at the Desert Inn in Las Vegas around 1950. It is pure publicity. Resorts used playful star photos like this to sell the idea that Las Vegas was Hollywood's new playground. NASA astronauts Neil Armstrong and Richard Gordon ride in a motorcade through São Paulo in 1966, waving from an open car as crowds gather. It shows peak space-age fame when astronauts toured like rock stars to sell the moon program to the world. British Army Film Unit men search a wrecked cinema projection room inside a fascist headquarters in Regalbuto, Sicily, on August 3, 1943. The broken projectors and reels show that film and propaganda were treated like military tools worth seizing. John Glenn smiles beside the Friendship 7 capsule on February 20, 1962, just before becoming the first American to orbit Earth. He completed 3 orbits in 4 hours and 55 minutes, proving the United States could match Soviet space feats. A sniper in Sarajevo's Grbavica area in around April 1994 poses with a scoped rifle during the Bosnian War. The siege of Sarajevo turned ordinary apartment blocks into long-range firing lanes, making simple street crossings a calculated risk. Greek students march in Athens in 1957, demanding talks only with Makarios and backing Cypriot independence after his return from British exile. The street energy shows how Cyprus had become a pressure point, pulling youth politics, anti-colonial anger. French writer and critic Marc de Montefort poses in the 1870s in a tailored suit, deliberately playing with gender style long before it was widely accepted. RAF and South African Air Force men eat lunch at Sidi Barrani, Egypt during Operation Battleaxe in June 1941, gathered around a rough table in open desert. Their meal was mostly tins and tea, a small routine that kept crews steady while Tobruk was still under siege. William Faulkner poses in the snow with his daughter Jill in Sweden while there to receive the 1949 Nobel Prize in Literature. The man who wrote the tangled Yoknapataufa County saga looks surprisingly playful here. John Lewis smiles in a Jackson, Mississippi mugshot from 1961 after he was jailed for breaking segregation rules during the Civil Rights Movement. That calm grin became a message. He would not be humiliated. Tourists gather outside the Frauenkirche in Nuremberg in 1904, dressed in long skirts and wide hats like moving architecture. The photo is a time capsule of early mass travel, when rail trips made city sightseeing a new middle-class ritual. A man buys lunch at a street sausage cart in the German Empire in the 1880s or 1890s, with strings of sausages hanging like signs. This was the fast food of its day, cheap, hot, and eaten standing up in the middle of city traffic. This is an early Lockheed A-12 style design, the Mach 3 spy plane concept that later led to the SR-71 family, photographed in the late 1950s. To survive at that speed, it used a razor-thin shape and special high-temperature skin. Army Film and Photo Unit men line up captured prisoners in Militello, Sicily in July 1943, as civilians watch from doorways and balconies. The photo shows how fast control can flip in a town, with cameras documenting the moment as carefully as rifles. A Grumman F-6F-3, Hellcat from USS Cowpens, flown by Lieutenant Junior Grade A.W. Magee, tears through the air on November 20, 1943, with white exhaust streaming behind. The Hellcat was built to beat the Zero. A teenage Jimi Hendrix stands on stage in Seattle in February 1960, playing one of his earliest gigs with a local band. Within a few years, he would flip the electric guitar world by using feedback, distortion, and wild stage control as part of the music. Baby Ruth, the huge vaudeville and film star, poses in 1930 with flowers in her hair and a fur stole at her feet. Her fame came from playing bold, funny characters when silent-era stage acts were being turned into early movies. Young Rosemary Clooney smiles at an NBC microphone in the late 1940s, right as radio still ruled American pop culture. Within a few years, her warm voice made "Come On to My House" a massive hit and pushed her into film and television. The White House is shown in the early 1950s with its inside stripped out, leaving only the outer walls as crews rebuild it under President Harry Truman. Hidden rot and failing supports had made it unsafe, so the interior was torn down. A man in traditional Tibeto-Mongolian-style clothing poses in the 1990s with a long rifle and bandoliers, standing against a cracked mud wall. After the Soviet breakup, border regions saw sudden power vacuums and black market trade. President Gerald Ford campaigns in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on February 20, 1976, greeting voters across an ice cream counter beside First Lady Betty Ford. It captures the retail politics style of American primaries. An Ardito from the 1st Assault Battalion Forley stands by a canal near Polcella in late 1944, pointing out the unit sign like a marker of control. In the final months in Italy, small bridges and waterways like this were strategic choke points. Captain John Brown and the 382nd Fighter Squadron ground crew pose with their P-51 in France in July 1944, the aircraft's nose art reading Big Mac. The P-51's long-range escort ability helped break the air war deadlock by staying with bombers deep into enemy territory. An elegant studio portrait shows an older woman with a high bun and lace bodice, photographed by Robin Lark on Memory Lane. She may be Helen Howes White, linked to Gainesville photographer Nathan C. White Sr. A Japanese Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally bomber flies over China on a combat mission, its camouflage breaking up the long wing and glass nose. The Ki-21 was Japan's main early war army bomber, but as enemy fighters improved, it became dangerously exposed. Ella Williams, also known as Ella Grisby, poses in an elegant gown with her small dog, the image built to sell her as a giant star of the sideshow era. Promoters claimed she was 7.5 feet tall, but she was likely closer to 6 feet 10. A uniformed man in 1992 poses in front of a wall message that reads, "God, if I die young, send me to heaven, because I have already been through a nightmare." The contrast is chilling. A calm portrait backed by a sentence written like a last note. John Dillinger sits in custody at Crown Point, Indiana in February 1934, looking relaxed while reporters crowd the room. He soon became even more legendary by escaping the jail with a fake wooden prop, humiliating the police and fueling the myth. A man stands before a makeshift court in Shanghai in 1932 as officials review a serious criminal conviction. After his appeal was denied, the sentence was carried out immediately, showing how fast and harsh justice could be in that era. Irish First World War veteran Jim Fitzgerald stands by his makeshift shelter in the Comragh Mountains in 1933, living alone after the war. His shell shock left him unable to return to normal life, so the mountains became his refuge from crowds and noise. Traveler women in St. Mary Cray, near London, clean and polish gleaming kettles outside a caravan in the 1950s, photographed by Bert Hardy. The shine is not just for show. Clean metal and careful order were a point of pride and a way to judge skill inside the community. I will be very grateful for the subscription. Every day I look for and show such rare historical photos that really surprise.